welcome to part 2 of our tutorial. We're going to be taking our now textured Eames house, and we're going to be creating a 3D environment to create a compelling render, or hopefully a compelling render. Just a disclaimer, you may have noticed this video is very long, so what I've tried to do is divide it into chapters. There are a lot of very repetitive parts of this video because I show the whole process of creating my render. What I've tried to do is in the really repetitive portions, I've sped it up and created a bit of a time lapse, and I've created all these chapters so that you can hopefully navigate fairly quickly to the parts that you need. So that being said, let's hop into it. So what we want to do here is we want to create a render that will tell a bit of a story. For me, I'm thinking I want to set this up in a way that sort of sells the house. So I'm imagining that we're going to put the Eames house in a secluded forest location. And the image we're taking, I'm thinking maybe it's taken by a real estate agency, and they want to tell the story of a working family that has this place to get away from the city on the weekend. So I'm going to show this dense forest path that opens up, and the light is shining here on the Eames house, and it's this sort of relief that's waiting on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning when the family pulls up. So we have our camera here. That's sort of why I placed it here in the last part, or in the first part of the tutorial, was to sort of get an angle that shows the approach to the house. So tabbing out, what we have to get working on now is creating the environment. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the textures for now because I find them a little distracting. I'm going to select the slab and the retaining wall, and I'm going to hit Shift H to hide everything else. And I'm going to want to create a new collection over here. So if I right click, I can now click New Collection over up here, and I'm going to double click on that and call it Ground Planes. I just like to create these collections to sort of organize my models so they're easier to find in the future. And you can see if I click on this collection and make it the active collection, when I hit Shift A and bring in a primitive, here I'm going to bring in a plane, it's going to be inserted automatically into this collection. Now, if you're modeling at some point and you forget that you're in the wrong collection, you can move them. I just like to try and do this as much as possible. So now, with this plane here, I'm going to activate snapping, and I'm going to turn it onto vertex mode. So with my plane selected, I'm going to drag it and line it up with the corner of the slab. Hit tab, drag this along. Ooh, maybe this will be a better view to see this. Snap it to that vertex there. Okay, for this portion here, I'm going to insert a loop cut, so that's Control R. Okay, GZ, I want to bring this down to the same level. GX. I'm just going to extrude these to the end there. Okay, so now I've got a bit of a ground plane happening here. I just want to bring these down here so it's all flush. Okay. Now going back to my camera view, I just want to get an idea of how much of the ground I'm going to have to model to fill the camera, because I don't want to model anything that's not going to be in our render, because that's not a good use of our time. So maybe I'll split this window again. I'll have the camera open so I can sort of see what's going on here. I think I'm going to insert another plane. 7. Now these are not aligned on the X, which I don't like, so GY, GY. Okay, that's what I wanted. Okay, so I'm going to hit Shift A again to bring in another plane. Snap to the edge here. And to that edge there. Just keeping an eye on my camera here. I'm going to bring this out. And I want a bit of a hill approaching the house. I'm going to bring this down. Bring this in a little bit more. And we can see we're not totally covering what's in the camera view here, so I'm going to take this, select these vertices and bring them this way. Okay, now I'm going to subdivide a bit here, because I think we're going to add some detail to the ground here, but this is far enough away that it's not really going to be in focus. We're not going to see it very well, so I'm just going to separate this selection here. Tab out, tab back into just this portion, select all, and then subdivide. Now I'll get this little subdivision menu once I do that, and I'm going to go up to 100 cuts. So that's going to bring us in a lot of geometry for what we're doing next. Alright, and now we get to do something kind of fun. We're going to do a little bit of sculpting. So if you go to the top here, you'll see we're in layout. We're going to go into sculpting, and that's going to allow us to sculpt. So here what I want to do is I want there to be a path that's sort of going up towards the house. I want it to be a bit higher on either side of that path, and I want the camera to line up with it so it looks like we're on the path leading to the house. So I'm going to undo that. Just going over sculpting a bit, you'll see over here we have all of our different brushes. I'm just going to use the clay strips brush for this, and this isn't a super high detailed sculpt, so it's not going to be too complicated. A little bit about sculpting, we can control the radius of our brush up here as well as the strength. And zooming in and out will also kind of change the size of your brush because it stays the same relative to your screen. So if you zoom in a bunch, then it's like you're using a really small brush, whereas if you're zoomed out, it becomes a really big brush. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to try to define where my path is. I'm just going to use a small brush here until I find something that I like. So I'm thinking maybe something like that will be interesting. Not quite centered on the camera. I'll need to move it over this way a little bit. Okay, getting closer. Getting closer still. Yeah, I kind of want it to wind a little bit more. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so that's what I want my path to be. But I did this backwards. I want it to be it's sort of an impression in the ground, not a path sticking out of the ground. So Control is going to make that brush do the opposite. It's going to sort of gouge this shape out of the ground. So there we go. Now we're getting something that I want. And then holding Shift will kind of smooth the vertices. Now don't worry if this isn't looking perfectly like ground right away. We're going to do some stuff later that's going to help us out a little bit. So I'm just going to build up the ground on either side of this path. Careful to zoom in and out so I can get different brush stroke sizes. This is a lot easier if you have a pen tablet, because you can use that to control the size of your brush, and the pressure can control the strength, things like that. But for this kind of thing, we can definitely get away with using a mouse. This isn't a very complicated or precise sculpt like we'd need if we were doing a character or a face. Okay, so I'm just building up on either side of this path. I want this to look just sort of like bumpy, rooty ground. So I'm imagining this is a forest. Okay, I'm going to depress this a little bit more. And then I'm going to smooth it out, because the path itself should be a little less bumpy than the rest of what's around it. What's also going to be a little bit important here is to get a sense of scale. So for that, I'm going to go back to Layout. I'm going to bring in Shift-A cube, Mesh Cube. By default, these come in at 2 meters, which is probably a little bit wider than we need for a path. I think a sidewalk is usually around 1.5 meters for reference. Yeah, so this is already wider than it needs to be. I'm just going to delete that. So I'm going to make it slightly thinner. Go back to sculpting. Where'd my brushes go? Okay, that was weird. So this is now... We're in sculpting, but we're not in sculpt mode. Okay, maybe we have to have this selected. Back to sculpting. Okay, yeah, that was the problem. Didn't have it selected. Okay, going to make this big again. Okay, this is looking good enough to me now. So I'm going to go back into layout mode, and then I'm just going to hit Shade Smooth. That'll make the sort of pixelated look go away. And then one last thing we can do if we want a little extra pizzazz is we can go up to proportional editing here, the drop down, make sure it's on random. Select some vertices, hit G and Z. The scroll wheel will control how big the area affected is. I'm going to hit Shift so that this is going to be hard to do with our snapping on, so I'm going to turn that off first. GZ again. Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit of crazy bumpiness to this. Okay, so now that's looking like a pretty good start for our ground. It's maybe even a little bit much, so I'm going to go back to sculpting, and I'm just going to smooth some of these really crazy spots out. Because we're going to add rocks. Ooh. We're going to add rocks and such, and that's going to give some character to this as well. So we don't need it to be too crazy. Alright, yeah, that's looking like a good start. So now we get to do something kind of fun. Now we can shop around for the assets that we want to use to populate this scene. So if we go to Polyhaven, there's a lot of good assets here for building out a nature scene. And oh, hey, look at the user render. That's our project. That's kind of fun. I would recommend going in here, assets, models. First thing I'm going to look for is rocks. I have this rock moss set already downloaded. You can go and look for some assets that you like, and then you're going to download those, and I'll show you how to work with them. Now, just be careful you don't download the super high-res version of all of them. I'll have a note on trees later, because those are especially heavy, and we don't want to crash our model. So now's a good time to save before we start importing things. When I'm placing assets within the model, I usually like to start with some of the biggest ones, and then work towards the smaller details. So for this, I'm going to start with the rocks. So I'm going to hit File. If you download an asset that's from Blender, it's going to be a bit different than when we brought in our SketchUp Collada file. Instead of importing, we're going to hit File and Append. Now I'm going to go to where I saved my assets. So I have Assets, Nature, and where are my rocks? Rock Moss Set. So you're going to click on the Blend file and then go to Collection. And I'm going to select this collection here and then hit Append. And that's going to bring all of those rocks in. So I'm just going to bring them over here, go back into my camera view, and we're going to work on placing these. So these are quite big, these rocks. So I'm thinking they're going to end up being a little smaller. Maybe we'll have some large rocks, but I think for the most part these will be overkill. Okay, so the cheat sheet I provided does have commands for transforming these that might come in handy for this section. So G, again, is to move objects around. If we want to constrain them to any of the axes, it's G, and then you just hit the axes you want to constrain it to. So you can hit X, Y, or Z. and that works for rotation as well. So when we hit R, you can hit X, Y, or Z, and sometimes that'll help us a lot for placing things, so we're not just kind of freestyling it. Okay, so I want there to be a bit of a cluster of rocks around here, so go up, and I'm thinking there should be some size variation. Another small rock here. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to position these above first, and then I'm going to bring them down, strain them to the Z, or the Z, depending on where you're from. Okay, that looks like a pretty good start from what I can see on my camera. I'm actually going to hit, save first, hit Alt-H to bring the house back in so I can kind of see what bits of it they're blocking out, because that might play a bit of a role in what we do. Now, I'm going to start copying some of these too, and when I copy them, there's two ways I can do it. I can hit Shift-D, that creates sort of a unique copy, or I can hit Alt-D, which links them. This uses less memory, but if you want to make one unique in terms of modeling, like let's say I wanted to turn on proportional editing smooth. Let's say I wanted to blow out a section of this rock. I don't recommend it because it'll mess with the textures, but if I wanted to change the shape here, it's now going to change the other rock you can see over on the side because they're using the same data. And as I said, it saves us memory, so we like that, because in this case I don't need either of them to be unique. Okay, something I'm realizing as well is Eames House has this big retaining wall because there's a big hill behind the house. So it's kind of important that we have that as well, or this retaining wall starts to be a little bit pointless. So, oh, and I'm realizing I'm also still in the ground planes collection. I didn't create a new one for rocks. So if I select all these rocks, holding down Shift and clicking on each of them, I can hit M, new collection, and call this rocks. Okay, there we go. Now clicking back on to ground planes, I can hit Shift-A, bring in, or here I can show you another trick. If I don't want the plane being brought in under the house where the 3D cursor is there, I can hover over this part of the wall, hit Alt, then left click, or no, it's Shift, and then right click, I'm sorry, and that relocates the 3D cursor to where I click. So I'm going to hit Shift-A, Mesh, Plane, turn my snaps back on, snap this to there, take this. I don't want to bring it all the way to the end because I think that would be overkill, so I'm going to change my snapping from vertex to edge, and I'm just going to bring it to the edge there. Okay, so drag these out, G, GZ to make it into a hill, kind of looking at my camera view here. And I think I want this end of the hill to be a little bit higher. I think that'll make this a bit more interesting. I'm going to bring both of them down a little bit. I'm also going to subdivide this. Actually, I think that was kind of unnecessary, but now we have it, so we're just going to work with it. Shade smooth. And I'm going to bring a couple of big old rocks onto there as well. D. Ooh. Turn my snapping off. Make this smaller. G, Shift Z, GZ. This to be big. RZ. So here I'm going to want to rotate this a little bit, and I don't think it aligns perfectly with an axis, but I'm going to try to line up my view with the way I want it to rotate. GZ, bring that up. Bring this fella along as well. GZ. Okay. Okay, yeah, this is looking to be a pretty good start. So the next big object I'm going to be bringing in is probably trees. That's a pretty important one. Now these are very heavy. We don't want to crash our model, so I'm going to hit Control S to save right now. And then I'm going to File, Append, go to Assets, Nature, and I have some 1K pine trees. So again, I'm going to go into the Blend File, Collection. I'm going to try the first collection here, see that with what that gets us. Okay, so that brings in the tree, or the trees, I should say. We got 3 of them. So I'm going to move this over this way a little bit. And I can already tell this is slowing down my Blender file a lot. So something that's important to do when you're bringing in new assets sometimes is to have a look at their settings and see if there's any ways that we can make them perform a little better. So right now I'm seeing that this has a geometry node set up, and I'm guessing it's pretty complex, and it's probably adding a lot of calculations that Blender is going to have to do every time I duplicate this or move it. So I want to stop that. So right now I did a little poking around, and I found out that this is actually, this geometry node setup is using a curve. So I want to convert this to a mesh to sort of bake the geometry nodes, and hopefully that will get this performing a little faster. So this is now a mesh, and it's already moving a lot quicker, so I can tell that did that did something good. So I'm going to delete these bits that we don't need, just making sure nothing disappears on the actual tree. Oh, yeah, you see now that this one had been converted to a mesh, it doesn't lose its leaves, but since these ones are still using the geometry node setup, I can't delete those just yet. So I'm going to hit Control Z until we get those back. Okay, there we go, good. So I'm going to select this one. I'm going to convert to mesh over here, and last but not least, convert to mesh. G, bring that over. Okay, now I should be able to delete these, and that's going to save us some memory. Okay, perfect. My blend file is already running a lot faster. If it's too much for your computer to do that fix with everything open, something you can try doing is just going into the blend file for the asset itself and cleaning it up a little bit before you try appending it into the new blend file. But yeah, I'm going to start working with these trees now. So here, I just want to make sure when I'm placing my trees, I'm not obstructing any super important details that I want to highlight of the house. Okay, so I want one tree at least to be pretty close to the camera. Okay, now I'm going to start copying these around, and again, I'm going to use Alt-D to make sure I'm using as little data as possible. And I'm also just going to pay attention to make sure I don't make these intersect with any rocks. As I'm copying them, I'm going to change up the rotation and scale a little bit, just so it's harder to notice that I'm using the exact same 3 trees and placing them all over the place on this render. Now, if you're familiar with Blender, you could say, well, why aren't we scattering these? And I just like to have a little bit more creative control with the large objects, but we will be scattering for a lot of the smaller items that we'll be importing into the scene. So here I have a problem intersecting with a rock, so I'm going to bring this on the y-axis a little bit this way. Okay, just going to hit save, and that's starting to look pretty good. I'm just going to save, and I'm going to try having a look in render view real quick to see how our shadows are working in here. Okay, it's coming along. I'm definitely going to want more shadows in the forest part itself to create sort of a contrast between the brightness of the house and the darkness of the forest path. So, what I could do to do that is duplicate a bunch more trees to cast shadows, but that seems like a pretty high intensity way of doing things. So what I'm going to do, actually, is hit Shift-D with my camera selected, Alt-R. Oh, have I applied my rotations? Okay, with the camera selected, I'm going to go hit this little orange box, the object properties, and I'm going to go to rotation, change this to 0. Oh, actually, no, that one I want to stay the same. I change these two to 0. And I'm going to create a render of just one tree. Shift-D. Okay, with this camera selected, I'm going to hit period over here to bring it up. Huh. How did this get? I'm going to select both of these cameras, and I'm going to put them in their own collection just so they're easier to find later. Okay, I'm going to close up this collection. Okay, so if I tap on the little camera icon there, it's going to change which camera is active. So now if I hit 0, I should be looking at this tree. I'm going to bring this over like so, and I want to change the sort of the aspect of this camera so that it's like a tall vertical render. So if I go into, I could just rotate the camera like so, but then it rotates my whole screen, which I don't want. So what I'm going to do is here, if I click on output where we see that resolution is 1920 by 1080, I'm just going to change it to 1080 by 1920. And I'm just going to reposition the tree until it fully fits within this camera view. So the camera view over here, GY, GZ. I want it to fill the camera. Okay, now I'm going to hide everything that is not the trees, and also I'm going to click this little camera icon beside them to make sure that they don't render. Okay, now my trees are in ground planes, which was silly of me. I forgot to create a collection again, so I'm going to select all of those, hit M, new collection, trees. Okay, so now that I have my own collection for those, I'm going to close all these other collections. I'm going to select this one so I can see which one it is. I'm going to select all the other trees, hit the camera icon so they're not going to render, hide them as well, just so there's no confusion. Okay, now just the tree for Blender to think about. I'm going to go over to my render settings, change the time limit to 1 minute. Now I'm going to render an image of this tree. But we have something in the background here. What is that? Ground planes are still showing. I'm going to cancel that render before it finishes. Click the camera beside ground planes, and we're going to try again, render image. And since, in the last part of the tutorial, I rendered with a transparent background, this is going to give us a transparent PNG image of a tree. So just a reminder of how to do that is under your output settings, you're going to, render settings, sorry, or scene settings. What is this one called? No, it is render properties. Okay, yeah, you're going to go down to film and just check the box for transparent. Let's see how our render's doing. That's already probably good enough. I maybe didn't need to give it a whole minute. Now that this is done, we're just going to hit image, save as, save it to somewhere where we'll be able to find it easily later. I have a renders folder. We call this tree transparent. Okay, save image. So now, I'm just going to hit Alt-H. I'm going to have to hit all the eyeballs here to bring everything back. All these pesky little cameras. So that brought everything back. Sorry, a little bit of cleanup there. Okay, so now we're going to make use of a handy add-on. This is going to be another one that comes built in with Blender. So we're just going to go to Edit Preferences and go to Import Images as Planes. So I'm going to check that box and then close. So now when I hit Shift-A, there should be an option under Image for Image as Plane. Now I'm going to go to where I saved that PNG of our tree. Nope, wrong spot. Tree transparent PNG, that's the one. And I'm going to bring it in. Okay, might have to work with the materials a little bit here. World, object, hit Shift high, so we're just looking at this. Go to our render preview, and voila! Now we have a transparent PNG of a tree. So now we can see it's going to cast shadows as well. If we go into render view real quick, and that's perfect, that's what we want. Voila! So you may notice that the plane you're using looks a little bit weird with the world lighting happening. The colors look super washed out, not really how it's supposed to. So a way to fix this is to bring in two shaders. One is an emission shader, and the other will be a transparent BSDF. And we're going to take the principal shader and delete it. What we're going to do now is bring in a mix shader, plug these into the outputs. The shader then goes into surface. The color will go into emission color, leave the strength at 1, and the alpha will go into the factor. And now you should have sort of a plane of trees that isn't affected by the world lighting. So that's sort of a handy trick. So what I'm going to do, just going to bring everything back, is I'm going to take a bunch of these. Ooh. Okay, just the plane is what I want selected. I'm going to scale it up. First I'm going to line the bottom of it, so it's more or less with the bottom of the other trees, and then I'm going to scale it up so it's about the same size as the other trees. Maybe I can go a little bit smaller. Oh no. Then I'm just going to hit Alt-D a bunch, change the rotation a little bit. I can change the scale of some of them too. And now all of these are going to help by casting shadows. Okay, so now, if I go back to my render view, the little render icon here, wait a minute. It should be looking a lot more shady, hopefully. We're getting there. I don't think these were actually where we needed them to be. It's going to take me forever to move these in render view. I'm going to get out for a moment. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Yeah. Yeah. That's right where I need them. No. Okay. I'm getting lots of shadows. Just what I wanted. Perfect. Okay, so the last sort of big prop I'm going to place individually, I think it's going to be some dead tree branches, maybe some stumps, something like that. So I've downloaded again from Polyhaven a few of those, so I'm going to File, Append, go to my Assets, Nature, and here I have Dry Branches, that's the one. Collection, Append. So now that we have sort of our big objects brought into the scene, we're going to start on something called scattering, which is a lot of fun, and it's a good way to place a lot of smaller objects in your scene. So first off, I'm just going to create a collection of things I want to scatter. So maybe I'll look at some references. I'm going to look for Ontario conifer forest. I'm going to see what sort of things are on the ground here. Okay, for this one, I'm seeing a lot of moss. A lot of low shrubs. I think around my house I see a lot of ferns. A lot of dead leaves. Okay. Yeah, something like this. This isn't a very... Okay, now it's loaded. So yeah, small plants, moss, dead leaves and needles. And a lot of sticks is what I'm seeing. So I'm going to try to bring in some objects like that. So you can find these sort of things, again, on a website like Polyhaven. Another thing I might recommend is an add-on called Plant Library. It's free, and if you download it and set it up, you'll get something that looks like this. I'll just go to my asset browser. Yeah, now I've got Plant Library here. I can look at some stuff to scatter, so maybe I'll look for leaves first. Create a new collection. I'm going to call this Scatter Underbrush is what I'm going to call it. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in a few of these. So these leaves. Gives us a couple types to work with. What else? So I also want ferns. And 2 types here. Okay, that might be a little too big. Actually, I might bring in the bushes and ferns as a separate layer, or as a separate scattering group. Okay, and make these their own collection called Scatter Bushes and Ferns. Okay, it's a little smaller. This should be good to scatter now. Okay, so before we actually start scattering, we're going to select this plane. We're going to go down to this tab called Data over on the side, and we're going to hit plus next to vertex groups. And we're going to rename this Scatter Underbrush. And 1, because we might do a couple different ones here. So with the plane still selected, you're going to go up to this drop down where it says Object Mode, and we're going to go to Weight Paint Mode. Now it's important that Scatter Underbrush is selected here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to paint out where we want this collection that we just brought in to be scattered. So I'm going to go into Camera View again, and I only want to paint places where I know we want this scattering to happen. So I'm going to paint around our trees, and I don't want the underbrush being scattered right on our path, so I'm going to sort of go on either side of that. So the colors we're seeing here, red is going to be where things are scattered the most densely, and then green and blue is sort of fading away to nothing being scattered. Now, if you want to remove some of these densely scattered areas, like right behind the stump, I don't think we're going to see anything. I'll just go and I'll bring the weight down to 0, and that will help me paint blue back in. Okay, yeah, that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go back to Object Mode, and now we're going to need to append a node setup. So in the zip file that was provided in the description for this video, if you follow the link to the Google Drive, there'll be a blend file. So we're going to append something from there. So if I go File, Append, I need to find that. So yes, the zip file, there should be a blend file called GeoScatter, and I'm just going to append that. And now I'm going to go not to Collection, but Node Tree, and there should be one called GeoScatter1. I'm going to append that node tree. So now, with this plane selected, we're going to drag this bottom tab up. We're going to switch over to the Geometry node editor, and from the drop-down, I'm going to select, first I think I'll have to add one. Yeah. And I'm going to select GeoScatter1. Now here you'll get a complex looking setup of nodes. If you've dealt with geometry nodes though, this will probably look pretty simple. And we have an object info node plugged into our instance on points. We're just going to delete that, hit Shift A, and search for collection, and select collection info. And then we're going to plug that into instances, or into instance on the instance on points node. And if we zoom into collection info, we're just going to need to select this collection here. So that's called scatter underbrush. Scroll through here until we find it. Scatter underbrush. Okay, so now it's going to use that. And as we can see right now, nothing has actually happened yet. So what we're going to need to do is go over to the modifiers tab, and we're going to need to add some settings here. So I'm going to click off to the side where it has this little cross symbol, and then I'm going to select our UV, or our heat map that we just painted. So scatter underbrush 1. The density I'm going to put to 1 to start. The scale max I'm going to put as 1. The scale min I'm going to put as 0.8. Now this is looking kind of wonky. I might need to check some of these boxes. Separate children, reset children. Okay, yeah, that's looking better. Now why am I getting these? Is the question. These shouldn't be part of the collection unless they were brought in. Yeah, so something weird is going on. Spike. There we go. That was brought in when we appended. Where is it in the model, actually? I'm curious. Okay, yeah, we don't want that. So we're going to delete it. Back. And now we can see things are starting to be scattered here. I'm just going to select this again. Go to my settings. Yeah, everything's looking like it's working right now. And to make this look better, we're just going to increase the density now until we get something that we think looks realistic. So I'm going to turn it up to 30 and see how that looks. Okay, yeah, that's looking better. I think we can go even higher. I'll try 60. And okay. This is, for me, I think this is choking the path a little too much. So with the plane selected, I'm going to go back into weight paint, and I'm going to change the weight to 0, and I'm just going to paint some of this away. Okay, that's looking a little better. Going back to object mode. So that's looking pretty good for the first layer of underbrush. The next thing I want to bring in is those ferns and bushes. So to add another geometry node scatter, well, first I'm going to name this one. I'm going to name this leaves and sticks. I'm going to add another geometry nodes modifier. I'm going to select geoscatter again, And this time I'm going to hit these two overlapping little pieces of paper to create a copy of geoscatter1. And I'm going to call this ferns and bushes. Okay, so here for our collection info, I'm going to uncheck the collection we had before, and I'm going to select scattered bushes and ferns instead. And we're just going to have to go back to some of these settings. So again, I'm going to select scatter underbrush 1 to tell it where on this plane we want things to be scattered. Put the density up to 1 to start again. My scale max is going to be 1. Scale min is going to be 0.6. Okay, now something I forgot to do on the last scatter that we're going to do for both of these is we want to randomize the rotation, and to do that I have these settings set up here. So this works in radians, so I'm just going to type in pi, and for a full rotation of randomness, I'm going to multiply that by 2, and I'm just going to do the same with the next collection. So pi times 2, and that should give us more of a random look. Okay, so 2 maybe. You know what? I think for these bushes, I want there to be a lot more ferns than bushes, so I'm going to get this out of the collection. And I'm going to rename this to just ferns. I'll make it ferns and grass. We'll add some mossy looking grasses to this. Density 3 maybe. Go back to this collection with ferns and brushes selected. Yeah, I want to bring in a wild grass and see. Yeah, okay. I want it to be a little smaller though. So I'm just going to go back to the original, scale it down a bit, Control A, rotation and scale. Go back to my camera. That's looking better. Okay, so to get a sense of how this is looking, I think I'm going to do another test render. For that, I'm a little bit bothered that there's no ferns coming in here. Go back to weight paint real quick. Okay, so another thing we can do to change things up a little bit is with our node group selected, we can change the location seed, change this to 1, and that's just going to sort of randomize where these things are placed to. Okay, that's looking a little bit better to me. Before I do test render though, I'm just going to hide a bunch of things. Actually, I just want my plane selected because I need to texture these. Dirt. How's that looking for size? That actually looks pretty okay. Don't think I need to make any big changes to that. I'm going to do a quick test render to see how the scattering is working. Okay, now that this is done, I have a few thoughts. First is that I need a higher quality texture on this rock because it's really big and in the foreground, and right now it's looking really blurry and not good. So I'm going to go back and download a higher texture resolution for that. Second thought is that the plants are still encroaching a little bit too much on the path on this side here, so I'm going to paint that out. And we definitely need some of those bushes and maybe some saplings to fill these woods out a little bit is my other thought. So for the next little bit, I'm going to go and work on that. So we'll just save this for future reference. So renders, call it R2. Okay, so just gotta remember those things. So first thing on the list, go to Polyhaven, go to Assets, for Rock, Models. I want to download a 4K texture. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to model some low poly rocks to use as gravel along our path. So I'm just going to bring my cursor over here. I'm going to Shift A, Mesh, Cube, Tab, All. I will subdivide it once. Then bring it up. Oh, what just happened? Ooh, what did I do? Okay, here. Tab. Select these. Select these. S. Now I just want to give some randomness to this cube to make it look like it could be a very low poly rock. Okay, that's looking good. I'm gonna create another. And see there, in this case I want to use Shift D because I'm going to change the actual geometry of this. So take this as said. Okay. These are going to need to be much smaller. GZ. Okay, gravel for a path. Maybe around this size. Apply rotation and scale. D, Shift Z, R, Z, GZ, Tab. I think this is enough for my collection. What I'm going to want to do now is I'm going to select these and I'm going to select one of our lower res rocks. Hit Shift Hide to hide everything else. I'm going to go into material mode and select these and then the textured rock last and then hit Control L. And I will do this to link materials. So that's going to use that rock texture on these here, which are not in wrap, so I'm going to select all these, hit Tab, hit A, to select all the geometry, then U, cube projection. And weird is happening here. Okay, yeah, with just these selected, I want to hit U, cube projection. Now I can go to UV editing, select everything here, and I just want to scale this way down and drag it over part of the rock texture that I think looks good. Okay, I'm going to take one of the gravel rocks and drag it over a darker part of the rock. And we can keep working on that until we get something that we like the look of. Okay, so that's fine. Now I got a couple of these low poly pebbles. I can use this for scattering. So hit Alt H to bring everything back. Now I'm going to create one last weight paint on here. Hit the plus button under data. I'm going to call this gravel path. Okay, so back into weight paint. Just going to paint along the path now. Okay, I'll put a little more red up there. Okay. Okay. That looks good to me. Now do object mode. Select just these three. Having a hard time selecting here. I'm going to Shift. Select these three rocks at M, new collection. Call it gravel. Perfect. Now, one more scattering. Geometry nodes. Create a new version. Call this gravel. Okay. So now, you know the drill by this point. We are going to find that collection, gravel. Change the density factor to be gravel path. Change the density, we'll start with 2 for this. Scale max is 1, scale min is 0.6, rotation can be pi times 2. Okay, so we have a start. I'm going to have to crank the density up quite a bit. I'm going to start with 100, see where that gets us. And yeah, we're going to need to go up quite a bit more. It's 300. 400? 600? Okay, yeah, this is probably getting pretty close to what we wanted. I think this is enough now that I can do another test render. See how things are coming. Okay, I can see right away I'm not going to like this gravel very much. There's too much variation in the color. Okay. So now comparing these last two renders, this rock definitely looks better. The forest is definitely looking fuller with these saplings coming in here. What else? What else did we fix? Yeah, the path is looking better in terms of size. I'm still not super happy with the color though, so I'm going to go back and edit the color of this gravel. We might rotate our HDRI a little bit around to change where the light is coming from at some point, but I think that's going to be a last step for me. Overall, it's coming along. All right, so this is as far as I'm going to take this render. There's still a couple things I would like to tweak. For example, I'd like there to be a better division between the foreground and midground. I'd like it more if these trees here were sort of darker to contrast with the light shining on the house. But I gave myself a deadline, and so I'm going to stick to it. Otherwise, I could be working on this forever. I hope that you were able to get a render you were happy with by following this tutorial. If not, please let me know in the comments what parts you found difficult to follow, and I'll try to address that in videos I make in the future. But thanks so much for following along, and I hope you have a good day.